Welcome to Alpha Insights. I'm Evan. Today we're digging into industrials and manufacturing, where there's a real tug of war between big capacity builds and fresh tariff worries. With me is Kate, our fixed income specialist. Kate, great to have you.
Thanks for having me, Evan. Excited to walk through what this means for investors.
All right, give us the high level. What's the big picture this morning?
Two clear themes. First, companies are spending to expand capacity here in the United States. Think chip fabs, defense and aerospace shops, and even medical supply lines. That reflects solid demand, especially for artificial intelligence-related chips. Second, there's a near-term policy shock. The U.S. announced a threatened 10% tariff on several European countries starting February 1st. So growth is coming from onshore builds, but trade moves are adding uncertainty for firms that rely on cross-border flows.
Walk me through some concrete examples. Who's expanding and where does the tariff risk hit hardest?
On the expansion side, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC, posted $122 billion in revenue for 2025 driven by AI demand, and they've finished a second fab in Arizona and are building a third. That's a big piece of chip onshoring. Becton Dickinson is spending $110 million on a flush syringe plant in Nebraska, and Kratos and Bombardier are opening new facilities to boost defense and aerospace capacity. Those are all signs companies are treating capacity investment as necessary to secure supply and meet demand. On the tariff side, the administration's 10% threat targets 8 European countries. That immediately raises the cost risk for companies that export into Europe or have European supply chains. If those tariffs land, exporters and logistics-heavy firms could see margin pressure or supply disruption until companies adjust sourcing or pricing.
So should investors panic about the tariff news? Or is this something companies can absorb or work around?
Don't panic, but do be selective. The impact depends a lot on each company's footprint. If a firm sells a lot into Europe or sources key components from affected countries, it could face higher import costs or retaliatory measures. 2 practical moves. First, check revenue exposure to Europe and the flexibility of suppliers. Second, look at pricing power. Can a company pass higher costs to customers? Firms with diversified sourcing, onshore capacity, or strong pricing generally weather this type of shock better.
You mentioned some policy moves that limit downside. What's the government doing on the Taiwan side?
The Commerce Department set a 15% cap on Taiwan-related tariffs for reciprocal and sector-specific duties. That limits a worst-case scenario for chip supply chains. It doesn't eliminate geopolitical risk, but it puts a ceiling on potential tariff exposure tied to Taiwan, which matters a lot for semiconductor suppliers and their customers.
And Canada lowered tariffs on China-made electric vehicles, right? How does that play into the picture?
Yes. Canada is reducing tariffs on China-made electric vehicles as part of a trade pact aimed at encouraging EV supply chain investment in North America. That could speed up supplier localization and joint ventures for battery and component makers. For investors, it means watch for announcements about factory siting, supplier deals, and cross-border partnerships in the EV chain.
From a stock perspective, which names should listeners be watching in early trading?
Keep an eye on TSMC for chip-related sentiment, Becton Dickinson for medical supply capacity signals, and Kratos and Bombardier on defense and aerospace capacity. Early session moves in those names could tell you how the market is pricing expansion versus tariff risk. Also watch companies that export heavily to Europe or have thin margins. They're the most likely to be volatile.
Any ideas for how investors might position portfolios around this, both offense and defense?
Offense. Favor companies with onshore capacity or clear plans to localize critical parts of their supply chain. Those firms gain from shortening lead times and securing customers. Think suppliers to fabs, specialty converters for sustainable packaging, or battery component makers setting up in North America. Defense. Reduce exposure to pure exporters into Europe if you can't get clarity on tariffs, and consider holders of pricing power that can absorb input shocks. For tactical hedging, some investors use options or hold short-term cash to rebalance into names if tariff headlines trigger a sell-off.
Quick one on sustainability. The Bain note said companies are quietly changing packaging rather than broadcasting it. Is that an investable trend?
Absolutely. Bain's point is that abandoning sustainability in packaging is a strategic mistake, even if firms aren't shouting about it. Expect steady demand for sustainable material suppliers and converters. That makes these firms interesting for longer-term exposure because packaging changes are structural and often take capital and time to implement.
Great. Let's wrap with the most important things listeners should remember.
First, expansion is real and happening now. TSMC's onshoring and new U.S. facilities across medical, defense, and aerospace show companies are investing to meet demand and secure supply. Second, the 10% tariff threat introduces near-term policy risk, especially for Europe-exposed firms, but a 15% cap on Taiwan tariffs and targeted Canadian moves for EVs soften some of the blow. Third, favor companies with onshore capacity, diversified sourcing and pricing power, and consider suppliers to these build-outs and sustainable packaging makers for longer-term plays.
Thanks, Kate. That was concise and actionable. And for our listeners, here are the key takeaways to carry forward.